Hello and good afternoon. Hi everyone, good afternoon. I hope you've been enjoying the day today so far. My name is Caitlin Gallagher and I'm a proud member of the class of 2020. Technically celebrating my 2-year reunion with some of you in the crowd, but also my first year in person. I was honored to be introducing this session as Columbia Business School has a huge impact on me personally and specifically social enterprise as well. So I work, I work in ed tech, and I was very involved during my time here with the Tamer Center for Social Enterprise, and I was a 2-time recipient of the Summer Social Enterprise Fellowship as well. Today, I'm pleased to introduce Dan Wang, Associate Professor of Business and Sociology and Faculty Co-Director of the Tamer Center for Social Enterprise. Also, Professor Wang taught me strategy back in the day with Cluster A and B. His research examines how social networks drive social and economic transformation through the analysis of global migration, social movements, organizational innovation, and entrepreneurship. After the presentation, you'll be encouraged to ask questions and throughout as well, as Professor has encouraged me to add. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Dan Wang.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Oh my God, I got to embarrass Caitlin just a little bit. A few weeks ago, I teach a class here called Technology Strategy, and we were able to welcome Caitlin and her cluster mate, Beverly Leon, who are the founders of a company called Local Civics, into my class to talk about how EdTech is changing the game when it comes to civics education. And so Caitlin did an amazing job with the current students here, so I'm so happy to have this opportunity as well to speak to all of you. How are all of you doing? Good time? Great building? Super excited to be here. Today I'm going to be talking about autonomous vehicles technology and the strategic and ethical dilemmas involved in this technology. And the reason why it's interesting to me is because this is something that I believe that our students and our alums can contribute to in a significant way. I knew that I was going to be following Bruce Usher, who's my co-director of the Tamer Center. And so I dug up a little bit of research on the intersection between autonomous vehicles, driverless cars, and climate change specifically. As it turns out, there's a lot of work that's being done on the impact of autonomous vehicles technology on climate change. In fact, there are these people who run these models about how much, in terms of carbon emissions, we can reduce if we were to adopt autonomous vehicles. The summary of this research basically comes to a consensus here, ultimately, that if we achieve a 40% adoption rate of autonomous vehicles with the current fossil fuel technology, that would lead to a 30% reduction in carbon emissions. And so this is something that we have to take seriously ultimately here. But at the same time, when I think of the future of business and I say autonomous vehicles, it's hard for me to envision. So who's a sci-fi fan here? Anyone is like a sci-fi like reader fan? Okay, I see you're hesitant to talk, but we're going to get you to talk today. But when I think about these things, I always think about sci-fi, and I want to bring up a quote by Isaac Asimov, one of the best sci-fi writers of all time. And as it turns out, in his vast compendium of work, he wrote about autonomous vehicles. It's from a short story in 1953 called Sally. You can Google it right now, not right now, but after the session. Here's what he wrote. He described this world, and he builds this world in which autonomous vehicles are everywhere. And this expert is from the protagonist's perspective. And so how it goes basically here is that I can remember when there wasn't an automobile in the world with brains enough to find its own way home. So he's describing driver-operated cars. Every year, machines like that used to kill tens of thousands of people. The automatics, the so-called driverless cars, fix that. We take for granted now, but I remember when the first laws came out forcing old machines off the highways and limiting travel to automatics. Lord, what a fuss. So he's describing the social and economic value that autonomous vehicles create. But at the same time, this is science fiction. If we look today, we can clearly see signs that this fictional world is soon becoming a reality. In fact, if you pose this question to automakers and technologists around the world, when will autonomous vehicles be mainstream in the market? You get responses that range from 5 years to 10 years to even 2 years. All these automakers are thinking about it, investing millions of dollars in this technology right now. But you know what? There is one person's opinion that is missing from this slide right now. Who do you think that is? I'll tell you mine. No, I think I heard it. It is the largest shareholder of Twitter. That's right, Elon Musk. So, what I'm about to show you is a janky YouTube video that I dug up, that was not made by me, about what Elon Musk says when he gets asked this question, when will autonomous vehicles hit the mainstream over the years? You want to see it? This is going to be very interesting. Okay, here we go. All right, I hope the sound works on this. This is in 2014. We're just going to go through the years from 2014 to 2015. Elon Musk is about to appear on the screen. Okay. Oh. I don't know why that's the... Can we turn it up somehow? We can't hear it. Is there a way to turn up the volume? Okay, if we could do that. Okay, the long and short part of it is that he says that it's going to be occurring every year, next year, each time, ultimately. That's what Elon Musk thinks. This is what Elon Musk believes is next year. This is a chart that describes, ultimately, the issue of where we are in terms of autonomous vehicles technology. There are 5 different levels of autonomous vehicle technology. There's no automation, all the way to full automation. This is where Elon Musk believes we are going next year, every year from 2014 to 2015 to 2020 and 2021. Here's where we actually are today. It's between levels 1 and levels 2. So we are far from this. But what I'm about to present to you is some data, because this is Elon Musk. These are experts talking about this. But ultimately, we want to hear what the rest of us believe about this. When I taught my class technology strategy, we actually worked with the students of that class to collect market data on our own to try to understand where this market is going. Ultimately, the reason why this is so important here is because if you look at industry experts' analysis, predictions about the compound annual growth rate of the autonomous vehicles market, the growth rate has a consensus of 22%. If you compare that to other companies that might be tangentially related to autonomous vehicles when it comes to big data and analytics, the CAGR is 11.3%, 18.7% when it comes to streaming video on demand, and space tourism, another hobby of Elon Musk, is 16.3% ultimately here. But again, we want to see what normal people believe about this. And so we work with a research company ultimately to determine what people believe about the autonomous vehicles market. So we asked a group of individuals, 450 Americans who represent the demographic makeup of the United States, when will autonomous vehicles hit the mainstream? And this is what they said. Here are the choices they had. And if you believe it, 45% said that they believe that vehicles will be mainstream by 2030. That's ultimately what they said. And so, what I would like to do now, ultimately, is hear about your opinions, because this is a chance for you to take a poll here. I promised you, in the description of the session, an in-class immersive experience. Take out your smartphones, scan the QR code, and you will be able to enter your word in response to the question, how do you feel about taking a 10-minute drive around New York City in a fully autonomous vehicle? It doesn't work?
Not working?
This doesn't work? Well, if it doesn't work, ultimately what you can do is you can go to pollev.com/WANGCBS. There we go. There we go. There we go. We're figuring it out. Expensive, awesome, fast. Let's see what you got here. So curious to hear about this. Okay. Okay. Technical difficulties.
Sorry, everybody.
All right, very good. 20 mph, hesitant, uncomfortable, safe, amped, crazy, good, long, chill. That's an interesting one. Okay, now we're going to hear from you. So I see behind me a number of words that are positive words and also a number of words that may be a little bit more hesitant. can I ask some of you who expressed the more positive words to tell us why you're so excited about taking a ride in this autonomous death machine? Hi, what is your name? Bruce. So can't be any worse than a New York taxi, right? I hear that. Who else? Why excited? Pearl. It'll be quieter. Oh yeah, you take an Uber pool ride, you're going to be talking. You don't want to be talking to that person, do you? No, I hear that. Anyone else? Why excited? Why do you feel excited about this technology? I mean, like, what's so great about this? Yes, what is your name? It's got to be safer. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. What is your... Woody says it's fun to be in. I totally agree. I want to live in that world that Asimov describes here ultimately. So it's ultimately so exciting to do this. These are the early adopters in the audience. There are half of you who believe that this is not the technology for you. Can I hear from some of you? Why are you hesitant to adopt this technology? Why are you hesitant? Yes. Some people just want control. I mean, ultimately, when new technologies enter into a market, we can't just think about efficiency gains and technological gains, but we also have to think about the human spillovers, ultimately. There was a hand back there, or a couple of hands back there. Yes, right there in the vest. Yes, hi. Yes. It's an emotionless experience. I'm sorry, you never seen Knight Rider? That was a pretty, passionate show, if I remember here. But yes, it's soulless maybe. You're part of a machine. Any other reasons for why? What makes you hesitant about this? Yes? Have I driven through Brooklyn? I'd say I have not, but perhaps you could elaborate for us. So it's the safety point about this. Yes, back there, back row. Mm-hmm. You don't have the proper infrastructure for it, and so you don't trust ultimately the technology either. Mm-hmm. 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 So there needs to be this entire infrastructure. Any other reasons for this? Yes. So you're always late. So the technology ultimately isn't good enough. This is so interesting for me to hear because it points to a paradox that appears all the time when futurist technologies enter a market. And that paradox ultimately is the following here. Sorry, not sure what's going on here. That paradox, ultimately, is that we are hesitant to accept a technology that we also acknowledge is inevitably coming. And automakers have to deal with this paradox. And so I hear the many of your opinions, ultimately, that suggest that we are going to be hesitant to adopt this technology. And what I would like to do now is to try to convince some of the skeptics among you that we should welcome this technology. I'm going to give you two arguments as to why, and I would love to hear whether I've convinced you that this is something of a technology that's worth adopting. So the first point I'd like to make is that when you think about it, most of our transportation is already automated. Have you ever ridden a plane? If you get on a plane, 99% of that ride is already automated. You get on, there's the takeoff, there's the landing, but in between, ultimately, it's already automated. In addition, there are cities in which you can hail a robo-taxi right now. There might be a human there, but that human is ultimately not doing anything. So these robo-taxis are already in operation in cities like San Francisco and Las Vegas. Same if you get on a plane. The second point is that we've been through automated transportation transformation before. And the example that I'd like to give has to do with elevators. Because back in the day, all elevators had a person inside that operated the elevator. There's a lever there, the person pulled the lever, it brought you up, it brought you down, and so on and so forth. And you would not dare to step into an elevator unless it had an operator. But the thing is, the elevator industry was incredibly advanced when it came to technology. It had already had the technology to try to automate elevator mobility. All it was a system of buttons, what we're used to now, ultimately. And the question is, well, how did they convince the entire market to abandon operators? And they went
with a playbook, and it was a very clever playbook. It basically comes in 3 steps. So the first step ultimately here, in terms of overcoming the fear of this operatorless elevator, is that they did ultimately, number 1, they looked to try to make sure that elevators felt physically welcoming. And so they went on a big marketing campaign, the elevator industry ultimately, to make sure that elevators were gilded, they had seats, they were comfortable, and so when you step into an elevator, you would feel physically welcomed. Number 2, the second thing ultimately they did here is that they went on a huge marketing campaign. And so the marketing campaign basically deployed the elderly as well as young children as actors to step into elevators in these ads to show that even the most vulnerable members of society would not be afraid to enter elevators. And the third thing they did, which was super curious here, is that they added an emergency stop button. Now, everybody knows that if you enter into an elevator, what you never do. You should never hit that button because you ruin it for everyone. And so the question is, why add the stop button if the technology is already there? You don't need that button ultimately here. And the reason they added it is because they knew that they had to overcome a psychological fear of the loss of control. So by adding this red button ultimately here, it gave humans in the elevator a sense of control, and making it feel physically welcoming also made humans feel welcomed. And ultimately, people began to adopt operatorless elevators. So this entire thing ultimately worked. In fact, this is the latest mock-up of GM Cruise, which is its autonomous vehicles arms. Its latest vehicle, it's called the Cruise Origin. It's meant to operate as a robo-taxi, and as you can see, there's no driver inside. In fact, there's no steering wheel, but there is an emergency brake inside. But you should never touch the brake, should you? Same with the elevator situation. You should never touch the brake. So they take this lesson and they implement it. So the fact that everything's already automated already, and the fact that we've been through this mobility transformation before, seems to suggest that we can do it again with autonomous vehicles. So for those of you who are skeptical before, did I convince you? No? I would love to hear why. What is different about the situation with cars compared with elevators here? You have spoken before, so we're going to give others a chance. Yes? It's going up or down. The decisions are much more complex. It's a little less complicated. Okay, I hear that, but you know what? Computer vision technology is so good. If you were here for the morning session with Professor Guetta, he described machine learning algorithms. They're incredibly good. We have machine learning algorithms that can recognize faces. They can tell the difference between identical twins as well. And so, ultimately, why can't computer vision technology aid us here before? Isn't that the whole point of investing in machine learning? So I hear you in terms of the technical challenge, but I think it's something that we can overcome. Yes? Mm-hmm. 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 I'm not going to follow up on this one. I'm not going to follow up on this one. I hear that. I think the point that you're trying to make here ultimately is that the stakes are higher. Ultimately here, the stakes are higher. There's a hand back there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wait, I thought that was a good thing. That gets me to like the Met faster. I thought going through lights. Mm-hmm. Ah, I see. I see. What's your name? So Leslie. So what Leslie's describing is there are ultimately these ambiguous decisions that humans have to make when they drive vehicles, and now we're putting our trust in machines to make those same ambiguous decisions. And so we might not trust them to do these kinds of things. Yes?
Well, we're here for the AI course in the morning. There were 34 warnings that were given to us about AI, and I'm really worried about the other guy, the typical driver out there, maybe when it's not so compliant. So the car, your car, you're ready to That's still rough. It's still exactly what it's supposed to be. But how are you going to anticipate everything that they
Aha, so it's a social dilemma as well. So it's not just about what the car can do, but it has to react in time to the ambiguous decision-making of the other vehicles.
how do you put the AI in to anticipate the moves that make no sense but happen anyway?
And we have to use data. Maybe we don't trust the data. You heard this morning that sometimes data can be biased as well, and so maybe they don't reflect our own preferences. Let's hear maybe from two more folks. Yes, hi. Hi. I'm doing well. How are you? Oh, is that right? Maybe that's going to happen again. I don't know. Aha, interesting. We're going to talk about that very scenario. Yes, Marine.
So it's on its way. It's inevitably coming. And I think all these things will be solved. All the dilemmas of the culture, a lot of that can be coded in. But while it's on its way there, I don't want to die while it's learning.
you want to kind of like freeze yourself and then come back to life when the technology has been mature, when a dominant design, so to speak, has emerged ultimately here. For me, this is such an interesting question because there will be some company or collection of organizations that solves these questions. And everything that you're bringing up is entirely valid. The decision-making is too complicated. It can be ethically ambiguous. Who is going to be charged in the case of a liability law situation? And so from an investor standpoint and from an operator standpoint, a key question that is important for us to consider here is that if there is an organization out there that is going to solve this problem, then who would we bet on to be the leader ultimately in this space? And boy, there are so many choices out here. This is the transportation stack, the future of the transportation stack. By the way, shout out to Flexport over here, ultimately, CBS alum started company, but even if you look at these other industries, there's so many companies that are involved in autonomy, machine learning, all of these software and hardware technologies that contribute to producing a safe and trustworthy autonomous vehicle. And so from an investor standpoint, to answer the question of which company is best poised to lead in this space, we have to make this question a little bit simpler. So what I'd like to do is present to you 4 companies that I would bet on. And these 4 companies are very, very different from one another. And the 4 companies in question are Waymo, which is Google's autonomous vehicles arm, Motional, which is ultimately a company that's a joint venture that I'll describe, Ford, a traditional automaker, and Tesla here as well. And so what I'd like to do is kind of walk you through the advantages of each one of these companies. So the first company that I'd like to tell you about is Waymo. So Waymo is an autonomous vehicle subsidiary of Google, and Waymo first was developed in 2009. It was launched as a Google X project. It relies heavily on Google's AI and data and its platforms as the basis of its technology. And its strategy ultimately is not on making cars itself, but it's on retrofitting existing vehicles with LiDAR technologies. And so it's a cheap way to autonomize your car. And the market strategy ultimately here is to not sell cars or sell the technology, but to develop partnerships across the entire auto manufacturing value chain. So that's Waymo, and I would call Waymo the typical technology generalist. There's another company out here. It's called Motional. And Motional is a company that started as a joint venture. It started as a joint venture ultimately between Hyundai and Aptiv in 2019, so it's a much younger company. It builds the autonomous vehicles technology directly into the car itself, so that ultimately is its technology strategy. It was also the first to receive a safety endorsement from this organization that I cannot pronounce, but I'm told that it is the best organization out there when it comes to safety endorsements. So that's really important as well. It's a leader in that regard, and it's focused on partnerships across different mobility verticals. So not just ride sharing, but also delivery, all these kinds of different verticals. In fact, you can ride an Emotional Lyft car right now if you go to Las Vegas. There's 2 other companies in this space, and they are also very different. So the other company that I'd like to tell you about is Ford. Ford represents our incumbent automakers. And what is interesting about Ford is that they have been developing autonomous vehicles technology seriously Since 2016, ultimately, Ford, if anyone has ever been to the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, the Detroit area, there's a place called M-City. That is a fake city that Ford has built to test its autonomous vehicles. In fact, what Ford is aiming to do is to accelerate its technological development through acquisition. So some developed in-house, some through acquisition, and also its market strategy is not to sell cars to you, but to sell cars to your companies and your employers that you work with. So that's very different as well. And last but not least, there's Tesla. And Tesla is a company, ultimately, that we are probably all too familiar with today. You can drive an autonomous vehicle today. You could just buy a Tesla, turn on that autopilot software, and have it drive you all across New York City. Its strategy is to vertically integrate its entire R&D into its production process. And its market strategy is not to sell fleets of cars, but rather to make you the personal owner of autonomous vehicles. And, you know, the thing about Tesla is often moves fast and breaks things quite literally. And so when we kind of array all of these different market and technology strategies in a typical way, as you would do when you were conducting an industry analysis, you'll see that they're kind of all over the place. But as some of my former students know, I teach strategy. And the number one lesson of strategy is not only do you choose what to do, but more importantly, you choose what not to do. And all of these companies are doing exactly that. And so when I look at how different their technology and market strategies are, I say this is a great thing, because this creates the potential for all of them to collaborate and create value across the entire value chain. Well, that's the market and technology strategy. But if we look at the regulatory strategy and what I've described, they look very, very different. Waymo's going to engage early, Motional engage gradually, Ford engage early, Tesla, you know what they're about. So the question here then is, what should we do about this? Because it's the regulatory strategy that each one of these companies is taking that worries me. Because if they are not aligned in their regulatory strategy, the entire industry is going to be toast. Because this is an industry that's not just about commercial viability or stakeholder regularity, but ultimately it's about spillovers into society. And so the question is, what kinds of issues come up that makes it so important to get the regulatory strategy right? And ultimately, what we can do is use some data to help us figure out what is so important about this industry that people are worried about. Now, I've already shown you this data in an earlier slide that we conducted, that we gathered through a survey that we conducted as a class in 2020 at CBS, ultimately. And I just want to tell you about this survey and why it was such a joy to do with this class, because we actually brought data to bear on some of these critical issues. So this survey consisted of about 444 participants. It was relatively representative of American adults in the United States. It was pretty gender balanced, pretty kind of representative of the racial breakdown of Americans. The average age was about 46 years old with a standard deviation of 13. And so this is a pretty trustworthy sample when it comes to understanding what the public believes about autonomous vehicles. And so what I would like to do is kind of show you what this data can tell us about what this representative sample's beliefs are about the most important questions when it comes to the autonomous vehicles industry. And so I'm going to do that by telling you a story with this data. And the first kind of question that's really interesting to ask is, well, when you think about a consumer's willingness to pay for autonomous vehicles, I mean, you were asked that question at the beginning about taking a 10-minute ride across New York in an autonomous vehicle. I wonder, how does that willingness to pay depend on an individual's own confidence in the autonomous vehicle to keep them safe? I mean, that was a big concern from all of you, right? You're worried about your own personal safety if you take a ride in one of these autonomous vehicles. And so what I'm going to show you is a bar graph. On the x-axis here is going from left to right, the confidence that you would have in an autonomous vehicle to keep you safe. Your own belief goes from not confident at all to super confident. And on the y, vertical axis, ultimately, is your willingness to pay. So what would your expectation be? If you went from non-confident to completely confident, would your willingness to pay go up? Would it stay flat? Would it go down? What would you say about that? It would probably go up, right? In fact, we have some estimates of what the average values are here, ultimately. And they range from $2.10 for a willingness to pay for a 10-minute ride to $11 or $12 almost if you're completely confident in the autonomous vehicle to keep you safe. So that's kind of comports with our kind of rational intuition here. We can ask another question, though, and this one's kind of interesting. Same question about willingness to pay, but this time, what is the correlation between that and your confidence, or this sample's confidence, in the ability of the autonomous vehicle to make the right moral decision? And the way that we asked this question on the survey was that it was up to you what you believed the right decision was. And so it's whatever the survey taker believed was correct. And so what do you think these results showed? As you grew more confident in the autonomous vehicle's ability to make the right moral decision, does the willingness to pay go up, flat, down, doesn't matter, totally random? What would you say? Up as well? So you're right, it does go up as well. In fact, it kind of is a little bit higher, and so it goes from $5 all the way to $13, but not so different. And so this kind of creates a dilemma. And the dilemma ultimately is that consumers, we know, will not adopt autonomous vehicles if they can't keep passengers safe. We also know that they'll have a low willingness to pay if the autonomous vehicle can't make the right moral decision. So the question is, well, which one matters more to consumers? The ability of autonomous vehicles to keep passengers safe, or the ability to make the right moral decision? And ultimately, what we can do is we can dig deeper in the data. What we can do is that we can look to see how people actually answered these questions. So I'm going to show you two bar charts again. The first is a histogram, or a bar chart, of the confidence that people have in autonomous vehicles to keep them safe. And also, another one is their confidence in autonomous vehicles to make the right moral decision. And ultimately, this is what it looks like. In terms of the confidence in autonomous vehicles to keep them safe, it's pretty kind of a normally distributed, response. Most people are somewhat confident. But if you look at their confidence in the ability of AVs to make the right moral decision, ultimately, we have a lot more people who are not very confident at all. And so what this tells me from the data, in that even though people are making a decision about autonomous vehicles, about both of these aspects, people worry a lot more about the ability of an autonomous vehicle to make the right moral decision. The strategic takeaway here is that the company that's going to be a leader in this market is probably not going to be the one that has the best technology, because it's going to be a race to that. But it's going to be the company that gets its regulatory strategy right when it comes to making the right moral decision. So the question is, what do I mean when I say ethical dilemmas? And there's a way to express this in video, but I have learned that the sound does not work. So I'm going to skip this for now. And instead, I'm going to tell you a little bit about ultimately what a decision would actually look like. Some of you might have seen this before, but I'm going to reframe this question, because ultimately, I want to create a scenario that happens all the time in New York. Because if you've ever driven in New York, you know that not only do you have to deal with cars on the road, because what else do you have to deal with? You have to deal with humans, people jaywalking, and also cyclists as well, right? So here's a scenario that's going to happen from time to time. Ultimately, here's the moral decision that a car has to make. Let's say the car is driving down the road. It's an autonomous vehicle. The brakes cut out. You can't brake in time. The situation, however, ultimately here is that there are two cyclists in front of you. And the car, even though it cannot brake in time, can make a decision to swerve one way or another. So it can keep going and hit the cyclist on the left-hand side, or it can swerve and hit the cyclist on the right-hand side. But I'm not done yet, because one of these cyclists is wearing a helmet. And so the question then is, which decision do you make? A car is going to have to make this decision if it's autonomous. I mean, this has to be programmed in. Ultimately, we're talking about other scenarios, but there's going to be a person in charge that's going to have to program this in. So let's see what you think. Take out your phones. In fact, if you have the URL up, it's going to change to that. And I'd love to hear your decision. In fact, you can change your decisions ultimately here as well. I'm going to bring up the results when you've had a chance. But for now, you don't have to reveal your decision, but I'd love to hear the reasoning behind one or the other. You don't have to tell me what you actually chose, but ultimately, can I hear from someone, why would you choose to swerve into the cyclist with the helmet on? What's the reasoning there over the cyclists without the helmet on? What's the reasoning? So they are more likely to survive, right? But what is the reason against hitting this cyclist with the helmet on? What's the reason there? Sir, back there? Aha. You can't have it both ways. Well, you can kill both of them, I suppose. But you cannot have it both ways, I suppose. So let's hear what you have to say here, ultimately. So it's a morally ambiguous decision. This is actually a kind of a instantiation of a big philosophical debate here. And the philosophical debate here is between something called deontological reasoning and utilitarian reasoning. And what deontological reasoning basically says, and it comes from Kant, is that you should make the moral decision based on whatever moral code that you subscribe to, and you cannot deviate from that. And so if the moral code says that you should not punish a person for doing the right thing, wearing a bike helmet, then you should hit the person without the helmet on. But there's another way to think about this problem as well. And that other way to think about this problem comes from Jeremy Bentham. And this idea is called utilitarian reasoning. You should make the decision that maximizes social welfare in society. What that means that we should try to preserve as much life as possible, so you would hit the person that is most likely to survive. It's an ambiguous moral decision. Ultimately, this comes from a broader category of problems known as trolley problems. And the way that this trolley problem kind of works here is that this is the classic iteration of this trolley problem. And ultimately what it says here is that this is the scenario. And so what I'd like to do is to get a baseline response for what you think about this scenario. So here's the same situation. A car is going down the road. The brakes cut out. Ultimately, it can't stop, but the car can swerve. If it does not swerve, just keeps going, it'll hit and kill 5 people. If it swerves, then it will hit and kill 4 people. But to swerve, you have to make the deliberate decision to swerve out of the way to do that. And so the question then is, which one would you choose? And so let's see what you think here, ultimately. And I have a prediction. I have a prediction of what the ratio will be here in terms of what you believe. Give you a minute to think about this. So I'm going to predict, once everyone's had a chance to do this. So again, to summarize, if you swerve, you will kill 4 people, but you have to make the deliberate decision to swerve to kill 4 people. And if you do nothing, you will kill 5 people. So 1 more person if you do nothing. So I'm going to predict, ultimately here, that it's going to be a 1-to-4 ratio, 4 being those who choose swerve. What do you think? How do you think I'll do? We'll see. It's kind of close. 1-to-3, a little bit, maybe a little bit more. But ultimately here is that most of you would choose the decision that maximizes welfare in society. But the thing is, this is fairly unrealistic as well. So I want to do this again, only change the scenario a little bit. And so same scenario, only the situation now is instead of killing 4 people, you kill a family of 4. And the computer knows that because it sees. It can recognize. That's how good computer vision technology actually is. I mean, this is the kind of decisions that you have to make. What would you say? So remember, it was about 28 to 61, okay? All right. So remember, it was like 28 to 61. We're a little bit closer. I got 4 more of these, okay? So here's one other one. This time, if you don't swerve, you kill 4 people. If you swerve, it's 3 dogs and 2 cats. What do you think about this? What do you think? Are you still going to swerve? We're going to try to shift that swerve number. Okay, so more swerving. All right, this time you kill 5 people, but this time if you swerve, it's 4 doctors. How do you know they're doctors? They're wearing those things on their heads. What do you think? What do you think? All right, now it's closer to 50-50. This time, this is the last one, I promise. You don't swerve and you kill one person. But if you swerve, you kill 5 criminals. How do you know they're criminals? They were just escaped from jail. They got those stripy things on. That's how you know. All right. What would you think about this? Ah, interesting. So you can see variations of this problem are going to change your opinion. And so these are difficult dilemmas, right? And so what I want to kind of conclude with is this question, ultimately, about which stakeholders' opinion should be prioritized when it comes to making these decisions about these ethical dilemmas. I mean, like, we can consider, of course, the AV companies themselves, but there's a whole constellation of stakeholders that matter here as well. And so, for example, also an opinion that should matter is the humans in the car. I mean, they're not driving the car, but they ought to have some say over what these ethical dilemmas, the implications of the ethical dilemmas. There are also governments, policymakers, and regulators that care about this issue as well. They should probably have a say on this. And also, I mean, like, professors at universities probably have some expertise about this, and so they should probably have a seat at the table as well. And so the question is, how do we bring all these different parties together? And the way that I'm going to kind of ask your opinion on this is that maybe we should go through each of these. And the obvious one that I think I would love to hear your opinion on is the one on the top right. Why wouldn't we just make it the case that everyone who steps into the car should just be able to program their own ethical preferences, right? And so, like, you all saw that you have very different ethical preferences. Why shouldn't we just let a person in the car just program their own ethical preferences in for every ride, and then we're done with it? Is that a good idea? I mean, like, that's an easy solution. I see some skepticism here. Maybe I gamed the questions to produce this skepticism. What is the problem with doing that? What's the problem with doing that? There's too many options. Any other question? Yeah? You're not really the stakeholder. I mean, like, your life is at stake. Not if you're no run over people. Others' lives are at stake. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ah, it's a liability issue. Okay. Yes.
It's the closest to what we do today.
Aha. So you're not advancing anything altogether. Any other kind of opinions about this? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. And so the idea is that, like, there's so many possibilities, right? Is there a reason to make this happen? Is there a reason why somebody would justify this decision for humans in the car to program their own ethical decisions? I mean, I can really only think of one. And ultimately, it could be liability, but ultimately, you know, a reason in terms of the benefits here is that it makes people feel like they have control. I mean, it makes people feel good, right? It's the same thing with the big red button. But I can tell you right now, in terms of the risks, there are many. It's too burdensome. There are system-wide costs if everyone has different preferences. There are too many edge cases ultimately here. Ultimately, you can easily game this system as well. Humans are probably pretty uninformed on average about these kinds of ethical decisions, and liability law becomes even more complex if you allow something like this to happen. So pretty much right now, that decision to give humans the ability to program their own ethical preferences into autonomous vehicle automakers have already eliminated that. That's, like, not going to happen. So again, we go to this issue of, like, well, why don't we let governments and policymakers and regulators have priority when making these types of decisions? And there have been attempts at doing this. In fact, the European Union has a commission that comes up with a statement about autonomous vehicles technology and automation in general every year. And every year, the statement ends up looking like something like this. The language is beautiful. It's full of principles. But ultimately, it has 0 action items. You can tell that they do not have MBAs making this decision ultimately here. And so the question then is, they're going to be too slow at this. And so why don't we let then the experts do this? Ethicists, representatives from all different countries. And the thing is, that could work as well. But ethicists also have very different perspectives on this. In fact, what we heard from one of your alums earlier is that the scenarios that I showed with this ethical decision making actually comes from a big study done by researchers at MIT that looked to see how people feel about this very same problem under very different scenarios. So they got millions of people to fill out these kinds of surveys about this ethical dilemma ultimately. Here it was called the moral machine experiment. And what was really interesting about this experiment here is that we were actually able to get insight into which kinds of folks or lives were most likely to be preserved and saved, and which were the most likely to be not preserved and saved. So here are those results ultimately. And so if you go through millions of these scenarios, have millions of people take this survey, here are actually the results. And so a stroller is the most likely kind of image to be saved. And that's above girls and boys, if you're pregnant, so on and so forth. If you look at those figures that are least likely to be saved and preserved, you have animals at the bottom, but dog is above criminal. That's like amazing, you know? It's absolutely incredible to see this. So this is just like the general average, right? But ultimately, people think differently about this in different parts of the world as well. And so, for example, if we divide the world up into, let's say, Western or Eastern or Southern, those general regions of the world, we can make some comparisons. And so, for example, in Western and Eastern parts of the world, when posed with this dilemma, the choice would always be for sparing humans. But if you look at Southern parts of the world, and I think that refers to like Latin America, basically, sparing humans it's always animals that are basically preserved. If you look at Western and Southern countries here, it's always about sparing the young. But if you look at Eastern culture, sparing the young is not a priority because there's a culture for reverence for the elderly in Eastern cultures as well. And so to pick up on that point, you would think, well, all of this is just geographically clustered as well. And there's some argument there. And so, for example, if we take that classic trolley problem of whether you swerve or don't swerve, you can see that countries in East Asia happen to be clustered on the don't swerve side. They subscribe to deontological reasoning. But even within that cluster of countries, if you look at whether you're in a scenario where you have to choose between sparing a pedestrian and sparing a passenger, countries like China and Japan, even though they're right next to one another, think very differently about this question. So it's a very hard question. So if you bring a bunch of ethicists to the table and ask their expert opinion, they're also going to disagree with one another on this as well. And so this is the most important question to ask about in this industry, which is given that we know that these different stakeholders are probably not going to be able to get along with one another, then what can autonomous vehicles companies do to ultimately make this strategy work? What can they do to make them collaborate with one another? And my students all the time ask me, well, what's your opinion on this? And I'm always hesitant to give my opinion and predictions on anything. But I'm going to leave you with a prediction. So I'm finally going to do it. Because I want to go back to this question about which stakeholders' opinion should be prioritized when it comes to making these decisions about ethical dilemmas. And my answer would look something like the following. Ultimately, what I would do is that I would give all of these different stakeholders a framework for collaboration. Rather than inviting them all to the table and having them duke it out, what I would do is that I would think about the type of decision along two different types of dimensions. The first dimension is the kind of ethical expertise required to make this decision. The second dimension is basically the stakes of a given decision as well when it comes to an ethical dilemma. And when you look at it that way, then it becomes a little bit clearer which stakeholders' decision-making should be prioritized. When it comes to low-stakes decisions in which there's not a whole lot of ethical expertise required, I would leave that to the individual human rider or user. When it comes to high-stakes decisions and also not a high level of ethical expertise required, perhaps that's something for policymakers to take care of. When it comes to low-stakes decisions, when a lot of expertise, perhaps technological expertise is required, perhaps autonomous vehicles companies should marshal their evidence. When it comes to high-stakes decisions, and a high level of ethical expertise is required, well, maybe that's when we bring in ethicists and social scientists, but only sparingly. So the question for me then is, why are we talking about this right now? And this is how I conclude every class in which I talk about autonomous vehicles here at Columbia Business School. Because of course, here at CBS, we make sure that our students are very good when it comes to financial modeling and tools, when it comes to strategy as well. But we also know just how much technology and automation touch our lives. And when I ask them, in these companies, who is going to be the person that they're going to look to create a framework and organize around making these types of decisions, which we know will determine the future of these companies, is it going to be the engineers? Probably not. It's probably going to be the business leaders in these decisions. And that's why it's so important to think about this right now. So with that, thank you so much, and welcome back to CBS. So I think I have like 5 minutes for questions or something, 10 minutes. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about this. Happy to talk about classroom experience, what it's like to be and teach during a pandemic, what it's like to be here in these new buildings, but very happy to talk. Thank you so much for your attention. Any questions? Mm-hmm. That would be a great decision for them to do that. They probably should do that. The point of the exercise, obviously, is a contrived exercise. I don't know if you noticed, but in those images, there were barriers on the sides of that road, and so that wouldn't have been possible here, but you're absolutely right. But that also brings up this other question, which is that when capturing these ethical decisions, you have to capture so many different variables as well. It's a multidimensional problem that it probably is going to not just require computer scientists and engineers, but also all different levels of ethical decision making. And so what you present is an even more complex constellation of issues, which is why we probably need frameworks to help us figure this out, which is why our task here is very, very important.
So I had a question about kind of what you mentioned earlier, actually, about air travel and how it's pretty much almost there. Do you ever see kind of air travel as being an initial testing ground for autonomous vehicles and how that works?
That is very
being
interesting.
said, there's like international repercussions of air travel, and it's mass transport rather than individual. That, although autonomous vehicles could also
The main reason why I don't think that would be a good testing ground for this is twofold. Number one, it's a high stakes environment to do that in. And the second is that we have much better ways of testing moral and ethical decision making at the intersection of technology. The best example I can think of is Ford's M-City, which is located in Michigan. It's a fake city. But if anyone follows the autonomous vehicles industry, the country that probably has made the most progress in this area is China, when there are actually very large cities that are built for the purpose of solely testing automation technologies as well. And so that is one area that I'm paying very close attention to as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this is a great question. Has anyone driven in a Tesla autopilot before? Has anyone like tried that out? Can I ask about your experience?
Yeah, so in that problem you displayed, the Tesla gets around it, they just throw the controls back to you.
Yeah. So we're back to kind of the normal. Has anyone else been in a Tesla autopilot before? Yeah.
I know someone who was.
Okay.
Disabled it because it was speeding.
Aha, interesting. So the answer to this question is that Elon Musk might believe that we're between level 4 and level 5 automation, but there are many ambiguous scenarios that are just not, there's just not enough data to try to capture. And one of the reasons why is because there's so many different environments in which autonomous vehicles have to deal with. And one of the most complex environments is urban environments. So the most successful testing of autonomous vehicles have primarily been in suburban environments. The way that Tesla actually works, correct me if I'm wrong about autopilot, but you actually have to have your hands on the steering wheel. It checks with you every minute. But there's an easy way to get around that by tying like a bag of pennies on the side. But at the same time, like this is kind of an issue that emerges. And so the technology is probably not quite there just yet. I mean, you can, try your luck, but it's probably not quite there yet. Yeah. Any other questions?
Andrew Yang's book.
Automation.
Yes. So he talks about the trucking industry.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. There are two sectors in which autonomous vehicle or autonomous mobility technology is probably, this is now my opinion, going to be most successful. And the first is in terms of mobility of goods and services, such as the trucking industry. But even before that, it's probably going to be about local delivery. In fact, if anyone is from the Bay Area, you've probably encountered one of these little delivery bots that are walking around on the sidewalk. LA has them as well. Those are kind of situations in which the kind of computer vision problem that's being solved by LiDAR technology is much easier because they pretty much involve low-stakes decisions. It's also there are fewer variables involved there. The same has to do with trucking. In fact, Uber actually has a trucking division. Some of you might know Uber Freight, and that's where most of its R&D in terms of autonomous vehicles technology, which it divested from last year, has been concentrated because those are easier questions to solve as well. But even that has not been completely automated. On highways, it has been for the most part, but when it comes to actually handing it off to local subcontracted delivery people, that's a much tougher problem to solve. But those are the two areas where we see autonomous vehicles technology being most promising.
So where are we on that scale?
On that scale? Oh, we're still at level 2 and 3, but level 2 and 3 is all that's required for those two kinds of applications. I think maybe one more question, if that's all right for everyone. Yes.
So thank you for both. I think your class is very, very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
What's your perspective in terms of scenarios, horizons, let's say, in which these questions would be relevant? So, all of New York tomorrow, where autonomous probably you would have much safer environment. Many of these questions would become way less relevant. Because all of the groundedness is so, you have less relevance for these questions. So, what's going to happen in the next 5, 10, 20 years?
Yeah, when it comes to the next 5, 10 to 15 years, I do not think autonomous vehicles technology will be widespread because a lot of that has to do with figuring out the regulatory strategy. Because ultimately, this is an area that regulators are watching very, very closely because political will ultimately bends to the side of certain stakeholders in the industry that are probably going to have the most advanced technology, the best solution, these types of moral dilemmas. Ultimately, the way that I think about this is that autonomous car technology is probably more of a bridging technology to a more system-wide automation solution. So the best kind of solution will probably be some form of collective transit that doesn't involve individual pods or individual cars. And so the kinds of problems that are going to be solved in driverless car technology are probably going to be applied to a system-level transformation that probably involves many other stakeholders, such as public transit and these kinds of items. And so that ultimately is what I would predict, but we still have to deal with this bridging period. And this is the very bridging period that's under discussion today. That's a very good question, though. Thank you so much. I am around if you want to chat.
To Professor Wang, and I think we definitely have a lot to think about in terms of the data, insights, and just the taste of what it's like to be in your class. So thank you so much. I'm heading back to Detroit at the end of the month, and so I'm going to keep my eyes open. In terms of just the rest of Reunion, on behalf of CBS, just a reminder that we encourage you to join your classmates tonight, this evening, either at the Rainbow Room for 1st through 20th Reunion, or at Michael's for the 25th through 50th and Platinum years. And that should be on the screen now. And we hope that you have a great evening, and we'll see you there. So thank you again, Professor Wang.